Welcome class, today we'll be taking a tour inside the George Bush Library. The George Bush Library has tons of cool exhibits to check out, but today we'll be exploring the World War II exhibit. In this exhibit, we will see and learn about lots of different events and technologies used during the war, as well as how our home state of Texas was both involved and impacted during the war. But before we go in, let's get a little background information first. As we have learned previously in class, World War II was fought from September 1st, 1939 to September 2nd, 1945. Locations of war included Europe, the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, Southeast Asia, China, the Middle East, Mediterranean, North Africa, and of course, North America. What you may not know already is how much of an important impact World War II had on our home state in both political and social ways. The first stop on our tour is at the life-size model of the Grumman TFB Avenger 1. The Avenger 1 was first introduced in 1942 and was used as a torpedo bomber for the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps and eventually used by the Naval Aviation Service for transportation around the world during and after the war. Despite the loss of nearly 6 Avengers on its combat debut, it eventually became one of the most outstanding torpedo bombers used during World War II. After the war, it was remodeled for purely transportation uses and was used until the 1960s. The Avenger was the heaviest single-engine aircraft used during World War II, and it only had enough carrying capacity for 3 flight members: the pilot, turret gunner, and radio man. One of the TFB Avenger 1's most famous pilot was Texas native George H.W. Bush, who became our 41st president in 1989. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross in September of 1944 for his bravery in dropping his payload before crashing over enemy territory. With a wingspan of 54 feet, weighing 15,904 pounds, and reaching speeds of nearly 280 miles per hour, the Avenger was definitely a force to be reckoned with during battle. By the time World War II began, pilot uniforms had been greatly revitalized. In partnership with General Electric, Lion Apparel had introduced electrically heated suits for patrol and bomber crews. This was due to the fact that high elevations were reached where low temperatures could instantly freeze flesh to any metal. During World War II, the U.S. American Air Force popularized the Ike jacket after being introduced by General Dwight D. Ike Eisenhower. The U.S. American Air Force later standardized their own Ike jacket. Prior to 1943, flight helmets were usually mass-produced, which required their design to be simple. The Harvard-designed ear cushions were introduced and became a great improvement to helmets, as they were not only more comfortable to wear, but also greatly reduced outside noises. Earphones also had to follow the helmet's new design change. Post-1943, radio receivers switched from the R-14 to the AMBH-1 receivers. There were 3 types of parachutes that were used during the war as well. Each had a unique design that best served its different purposes. Bomber crew members used chest-type parachutes. Bomber pilots used backpack-type parachutes, like the one featured here, and flight pilots used seat-type parachutes. One of the many important contributions the U.S. submarine force made during the war was lifeguarding. These men were to rescue airmen from the U.S. and Allied forces who had been shot over the water. If the U.S. submarines received any information about a fallen aircrew, they would respond to their location and rescue the men into safety. One of the most important submarine rescues was the rescue of Lieutenant George H.W. Bush by the USS Finback on September 2, 1944, about 500 miles south of Tokyo. Lieutenant Bush dropped 4 500-pound bombs onto Japanese soil, destroying their communication installations. However, Japanese defenders fired back at Bush's torpedo bomber and it caught fire. Unfortunately, 2 of Bush's crewmates were not able to escape in time, whereas Bush successfully bailed out and landed in waters offshore of the island. Luckily, a 312-foot-long Gatto-class submarine, the USS Finback, which is featured here in the museum, was stationed nearby and rescued Bush and other airmen. Aircraft carriers are ships that are used to bring airplanes closer to distant battle areas. During World War II, most of the fighting was done in the Pacific Island and coastal areas, so bringing aircrafts to the battlefront via ships made sense. Aircraft carriers impacted future wars and military strategies. Although the first aircraft carriers were built by the Japanese in the 1920s, Great Britain and the U.S. are the only military forces today that heavily rely on them. There were 24 different types of aircraft carriers used during World War II. Some of them were large enough to hold up to 2,217 military members on board, as well as a total of 90 various types of aircrafts, including fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers. The next stop on our tour is at the K-20 aerial camera. This small camera was a very important technological development during the Second World War. The K-20 aerial camera allowed military crew to capture photos during flight that helped to bring back vital information to the military bases about physical developments and features over enemy land. The K-20 is most famous for its use on the Enola Gay airship, which was used to drop the atomic bomb over Hiroshima. In fact, the very photos used to capture the iconic image of the atomic bomb's mushroom cloud were taken with the K-20 aerial camera. The creation of more functional and reliable safety gear was another important development during the war. The life jacket featured here in the museum was standard for any Naval or Air Force member to have on their person in the event of a crash. Complete with a mouthpiece used to inflate the life vest and pouches for various other survival equipment, life jackets like these were vital to the survival of many fallen Naval and Air Force members who landed in the ocean during deployment. Sea dive markers, like the ones featured here in the museum, were used as a life-saving device for sea rescue. This product was produced by the United States Armed Services for the use on all military aircrafts. The marker contains a fluorescent green dye that spreads over the surface of water to increase the visibility for rescue pilots to see. The marker can easily be placed in the life vest pocket like the one previously shown, or a life raft in their safety kits. Many handguns were issued into military services during the war. From Colt to Smith & Wesson, high-power revolvers like this one here were a very popular choice of weaponry used during combat. The Smith & Wesson .38 caliber featured here in the museum was used by George H.W. Bush and many other military members like him during the war. Being used in the military combat as early as the 1890s, this type of revolver is still a very popular handgun used today. Like many communication receivers used during the war, the purpose of the Airway Communication Receiver (RCK) allowed military members to communicate quickly to one another through radio signals passed through airwaves. This particular receiver was used in the radio tower at Grand Prairie Naval Station during World War II. During the war, more than 1,500,000 military personnel came to Texas for training. War-related industry lured farmers, small-town residents, and others into developing urban centers. Many workers were women, who before the war often remained at home and did not work outside of the house. Texas quickly became more urban than rural, and the Great Depression faded into memory. The military presence in Texas grew exponentially during World War II. There were 142 major military installations across the state, and more than 750,000 Texans served in uniform during the war. Some rose to the highest levels of command, including Admiral Chester W. Nimitz and General Dwight D. Eisenhower. 33 Texans earned the Medal of Honor, including Audie Murphy, the Army's most decorated soldier, and Commander Samuel Daly, the war's most highly decorated naval officer. Also among the Medal of Honor holders were 5 of Latino descent. Tragically, more than 22,000 Texans gave their lives while in service during the war. Despite the horrific human toll, the war brought lasting progress to the Lone Star State. Civilians on the home front played a huge part in attaining victory. Scrap metal drives, war bond campaigns, and rationing all contributed to the wartime effort. Manufacturing increased, the permanent population increased, and urbanization and modernization of Texas were well underway. Because of World War II, the face of Texas changed forever.